There were challenges. A tremendous amount of good was done for many, many people. However, people across pretty much all sides of the political spectrum recognize that there were a lot of mistakes that were made as well. The design of these developments in many cases was not optimal. In many instances, there were way too many units. The developments were far too dense. For example, we'll talk a little bit about a very famous public housing development called Cabrini-Green. That project had 3,607 apartment units. It was gigantic. Today's tax credit developments, which are night and day from the public housing of yesteryear, have maybe 250 units. Now, many of these public housing developments have been dramatically improved. We're going to watch a video about Cabrini-Green that tells something about the story of where it was initially and how it's been improved and revitalized to better serve its residents.
It has now been more than 2 decades since the Cabrini-Green housing projects were torn down in Chicago and replaced with new housing. 21 years later, CBS 2's Suzanne Le spoke to the developer and the very first person to move from Cabrini-Green into one of the newly constructed buildings.
When I say these 2 words, Cabrini-Green, what comes to mind for you?
Home. It was my home.
In 2001, Betty Flake was a single parent with 3 children in elementary school. They all called Cabrini-Green home for a decade.
I raised my kids pretty much there. They all finished school successfully. They all went to college. And my son became a professional basketball player overseas.
Flake lived in the first building torn down in Cabrini-Green in 2000. A building plagued by violence, drugs, and gangs. Flake says she was the very first Cabrini-Green resident to move into Northtown Village 21 years ago. She shared this video with us. This is the inside of her home at Christmas.
I made this my home. I got more options here than I had in Cabrini.
Northtown Village has 261 units. It sits on 7 acres where Cabrini-Green once towered.
The last one that got torn down was this one here, 1230 North Burling.
Project co-developer Peter Holston had the first of its kind vision for Northtown Village and the second phase of development, replacing Cabrini-Green, Parkside of Old Town.
We wanted to have this look like a Chicago neighborhood.
Northtown Village was a mix of rental and for sale properties with 3 income groups: those buying and renting their homes at market rate, former public housing residents from Cabrini-Green, and those qualifying for affordable housing.
It was interesting in the beginning having people come together in the same neighborhood from quite different backgrounds. Some of them decided it wasn't for them. Others decided to make the best of it. And 20 years later, we still have a handful of folks that were here over the 20-year period.
Flake says she, along with other Cabrini-Green residents who were part of community groups, worked directly with Holston, giving him input.
Anybody who took these places was about the beauty. It was about the change. It was ready for it.
To move into the new developments here, applicants from Cabrini-Green had to follow really strict rules. And for some, those rules were life-changing. There could be no drug use. Applicants had to pass drug tests, and you could not have a criminal record, which was the same for all other rental residents.
There have been challenges where people probably want to go against the rules because they wasn't used to rules. But for the better part, most of us have adapted to the rules. The ones that didn't fit this project, they didn't just throw the people out. They made sure they got their Section 8 back so they can move on. They did not just put the tenants out.
The CHA says 1,770 families were living in Cabrini-Green in October of 1999. About 500 families qualified to move into the new developments.
This is the land on which some of the most challenged buildings sat.
In 2022, there are still 2 parcels of land remaining in Parkside of Old Town, right across from the Jenner campus of the Ogden International School of Chicago.
This right here will be our last phase, 91 units, bringing the total to just under 800 units that we were to build here.
Holston's firm is developing Parkside of Old Town in partnership with the tenant organization Cabrini-Green Local Advisory Council, which has a 40% share in the development.
We're just going to keep on doing this. This is my life's work, and we're going to keep doing it.
Suzanne Le, CBS 2 News.
With many of the buildings now more than 20 years old, Holston has received funding from the city to rehab all 116 rental units in Northtown Village. New flooring, bathrooms, and kitchens are going into each unit. Holston says residents will be relocated temporarily while the rehab work is done.
So, as I mentioned, there have been massive changes brought about in a lot of the public housing across the United States. Some of the challenges of public housing that resulted in problems, and pretty much everybody on both sides of the political spectrum agrees that sociologically there were a lot of missteps with public housing. If you concentrate poverty, if you have extremely dense developments with thousands of people at very low income, it just generally doesn't work very well. A lot of these developments were not designed in a way that was very conducive to a good family life or a stable environment for children. So a lot of the public housing in Houston, Texas, for example, does not have air conditioning. That's kind of crazy. The developments that were built nowadays have social services, computer labs, educational facilities, tie-ins with nonprofits, a broader spectrum of income, so mixed income tenant populations, and just lots of things that we've learned over decades make affordable housing a beautiful and supportive and nurturing community. Another big challenge that the public housing program had was that in addition to all of these developments being designed, developed, and constructed and managed by governmental entities, instead of private sector, for-profit, nonprofit companies that have to deal with competition and have different market pressures that help them to treat their residents well, the funding for these developments was dependent on how much Congress would appropriate, and they were chronically underfunded. So if you're a public housing authority that was trying to maintain properly your apartments, and your funding was dependent upon the United States government, and they're not giving you enough money to be able to patch the roof, to fix problems, and to maintain it properly, and to improve it, you had an almost impossible job before you. A lot of public housing developments, or sometimes referred to as the projects, have been revitalized and transformed in the last couple of decades. Many people use the term the projects broadly to describe all of affordable housing, but generally they're referring to public housing developments that had troubled histories. There is so much negative public perception about the public housing program that it's kind of impossible to overstate the degree to which that has impacted our ability to successfully develop new, modern, much greatly improved affordable housing today. In my career, I have been an advocate for and an attorney for affordable housing developers and for public housing authorities and for cities. And I will tell you that every time we have proposed to build beautiful, new, modern, affordable housing that really will be an amenity and a positive impact on the community within which it's being developed, every time the neighboring residents oppose these developments. When Jack Kemp was the Secretary of HUD, he made an observation. He noted that people almost universally agree that we should have high-quality, affordable housing for people of low and moderate income. However, they don't want it near them. So he coined this term, not in my backyard, which you hear the acronym NIMBY often, which refers to that phenomenon. Throughout my career, I've represented affordable housing developers and been the representative of governmental entities proposing to develop really high quality, wonderful affordable housing in various neighborhoods. And almost every time we get tremendous opposition. So I've been in lots of homeowners association meetings where 500 people who are single family homeowners are there with virtual pitchforks and torches who want to kill me because I'm proposing building any kind of government subsidized housing near their homes. Now, in some cases, that opposition stems from racism, from classism, and from very negative, wrong, hurtful, harmful places. But on the other hand, many times you have people who are single-family homeowners, and the home that they own is the biggest investment they will ever make in their lives, and because they don't know what I know, that the affordable housing development we build today is really wonderful and will be a strength and an asset to their community, they often watch TV shows like The Wire and look at the way that public housing is perceived and portrayed as dangerous and difficult, and they fear it's going to hurt their property values. So as housers, one of the things that I think that we can do best is to work with people and not assume the worst about their intentions, but try to help them to understand that what we do today is night and day different from the public housing of yesteryear. Here's a picture of the demolition of Cabrini-Green. It was developed way back in 1942, and there were extensions that were developed in 1958 and 1962. Demolition began in 2000, and the last residents moved out in 2010. This is sort of emblematic of the transformation of the public housing program. Congress appropriated a lot of money through a program called Hope 6 to allow public housing authorities to fix the problems with public housing developments and transform them into communities that are better environments for their residents. This is an example of one of the developments that was used to replace Cabrini-Green. This is another development that replaced part of Cabrini-Green called Parkside of Old Town. These new developments employed architectural design that is modern and that have modern amenities and facilities that make them beautiful places to live and wonderful places within which to raise a family. Now, it's not always fair to malign public housing as a failed social experiment because a lot of the problems in public housing were wildly exaggerated. In 1989, Congress created a national commission to study severely distressed public housing. They found that actually, despite public perception of widespread problems at public housing developments, that only 6% were severely distressed. And so, as I mentioned, Congress appropriated $600 million for the Hope 6 program, which gave public housing authorities the ability to transform and redesign and reimagine public housing throughout the U.S. Join me for the next section, which is on the Housing Choice Voucher Program.